Greetings and welcome back to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Christmas Day, December 25th, 2025. Merry Christmas, one and all. And those of you who are familiar with the Dr. J Vlog series, you'll probably be saying, well, where were you? So it's been a while. I started this vlog and I recorded a vlog every day starting back in January, the first of this year, and went right on up through the first week of November. So something like 300 consecutive days of new vlogs. And then I decided to take a break and reevaluate the purpose of this. I don't think the vlog was hitting the way that I thought it might hit or having the impact that it would have. And most importantly, I realized that perhaps I wasn't doing it for exactly the right reason. So what do I mean by that? Well, a couple of things. One is that you can't always produce your best material or your best song or, have your best performance, whatever it might be, play your best game every single time out. I mean, you can do the best that you can at that moment, but, objectively speaking, you're going to have better games and worse games, right? Better performances, worse performances, etc. So that was one factor. I realized that, okay, rather than try to play a great game every single time out or every single day, maybe I should take some break, get some rest in between. And then more importantly, I think the idea was, what's the purpose of the vlog? Who am I serving? And I got the sense that maybe this is more self-indulgent rather than focusing on the audience and yourselves. And so I've decided to recommit and refocus on you folks, on the audience, and hopefully share insights that are useful, timely, helpful, and not just frivolous or, reminders of things that are so obvious that why are you taking the time or, why am I wasting your time? I guess that's the bottom line. I don't want to be wasting your time, although, again, you'll be the judge of that. So what we're going to do is just do an occasional vlog, maybe once a week, maybe a little bit more, depending on whether I feel like I've got something interesting or helpful to say. And I'll be taking requests too along the way. So if you want me to address particular issues, then I'm happy to do so. So today we're going to be talking about forgiveness specifically, okay? And again, if you're familiar with some of the earlier vlogs, you'll know that I've talked about us, meaning the royal we, these human beings. We're this incredibly evaluative species. It's truly what sets us apart. So we're from all other species. So we're constantly judging correct and incorrect, right and wrong, good and bad, desirable and undesirable. And so we're always evaluating information and situations, often with good reason, because we want to know, is it safe or not? Or, am I in danger? How are things going at this moment? Are we struggling? And if so, for what reasons? And will action A solve the problem that I'm dealing with, or would action B be a better solution? And much more, constantly. So even for the little things, we're evaluating. Are you driving too fast? Is that person driving too close? Did she just run a red light? Am I going to be late for work? And much more, right? So we confront this steady stream of information, and we have to be evaluating the information, and we have to make practical judgments about what to do under various circumstances. But I've also talked about previously how there are three different types of judgments essentially that we make, and these overlap to a certain degree too, but they are sort of analytically distinct. So we're often making factual judgments about information. Is it true or false? We're often making moral judgments about information. Is that right or wrong? Or we're making aesthetic judgments. Is that beautiful or ugly? But the harshest judgments typically involve the moral kind, right? The ethical issues, the questions regarding who should be blamed if things aren't going as planned, or if you're not satisfied with the situation or with your lot in life, or things are problematic for whatever reasons. And in this regard, I think there are two types of extremes, sort of at opposite ends of the continuum, right? So that is, on the one hand, you've got those who place the blame on everyone or everything else, or God or Satan. That's the source of their troubles. The source of all of their problems is always external to themselves, right? These sources and forces beyond their control. It's always everyone else that's the problem. So I'll deal with that perspective another time. But today I'd like to just consider the other side of the proverbial coin. That is, those who blame themselves almost exclusively for their struggles. So they view themselves as the problem, as fundamentally flawed and the main source of their own misery. And to be sure, sometimes that might be the case. But in my experience, it's more of a two-way street. That is, yeah, there's stuff that we're responsible for and that we can control to a large degree. But then there's a lot of stuff that's clearly beyond our control, right? Like the year that we were born, the family that we were born into, our race and ethnic background, shall we say, the specific language that we're given to learn from birth, even the society into which we're born, and so on. And so here I'm just talking about our own understanding and appreciation, and sometimes lack of appreciation for ourselves or how we see ourselves. So this vlog then is mainly for those who are at the extreme end of self-blame or hypercritical of themselves, and who are especially weighed down by their pasts and even their present understandings and expectations of themselves. So simply put, of course, we all make mistakes. We've said things that we wish we hadn't. We've done things perhaps that we regretted later. And yet we can rethink our personal histories and note that we were usually doing the best that we could at that time, at least with the information that we had at our disposal and the consciousness that we possessed. And that includes the maturity or relative lack thereof and the wisdom or relative calm at our disposal as well. And these things, of course, change over time. And we've got that old expression, that old trope, well, hindsight is 20/20, which is partly true, at least in the sense that we often stand in a place today where we have a new awareness, understanding, and information. And the fact of the matter is that we end up judging the person that we used to be as though we should have known then what we know now. But that earlier self, of course, could not know. That self was moving through life armed with, the particular perspectives and knowledge and experience at that moment in time, with the tools and wisdom available then, with the clarity, or again, relative lack of clarity at that time. As Alan Watts once commented, to condemn yourself for the past is like scolding a child for not knowing calculus. You learn through fumbling, error, and falling down. Every mistake was part of the path that brought you here. And so forgiveness starts not with grand gestures, but with the simple recognition that you were doing your best at that time, even if your best looked clumsy or confused. And so that recognition allows you to soften. And to soften means that you can begin to forgive yourself. And if you can start to forgive yourself, you can certainly start to forgive others as well. So let me be very clear here on this point. So it doesn't mean that you should just erase the past or pretend that nothing bad ever happened, but recognize instead that that person that you're judging existed in a different reality of that time. It was a chapter that was being written in an earlier phase or stage of life. Every choice, every blunder, every harsh word you might regret was not a crime against humanity or existence, but merely a step in learning how to walk, and then perhaps to run, and then ultimately perhaps to fly. And to fly, of course, requires that we lighten our load, that we free ourselves from the constraints that weigh us down. Instead, there's a real problem, I think, to the extent that many of us carry our mistakes like stones in a sack, weighing us down and making the journey that much more difficult. And even worse, we sometimes drag these stones along with us everywhere, and year after year, replaying the dramas and the traumas and the various scenes that we wish that we could somehow edit or rewrite. But as Rafiki in The Lion King once said, it doesn't matter, it's in the past. To which Simba says, but it still hurts. And Rafiki says, oh yes, the past can hurt. But the way I see it, you can either run from it or learn from it. And I think the problem is that many people do neither. Instead, they continue to punish themselves for what they've done, or even worse, to repeat the same mistakes. And so they suffer then these self-inflicted wounds on a rather regular, and for some people even a daily basis. So rather than regret the past or long to somehow rewrite the scenes that have played out. Your aim, I think, should always be to learn from the past. And then you can invest your time and energy in writing the script for the story that you'd like to tell, the life you'd like to live going forward. If you cling to your past and self-condemnation, then you're holding yourself down with the dead weight of those many stones that you keep dragging around everywhere. And no wonder it's hard to walk at times, to say nothing of running and certainly not flying, for that would be, entirely out of the question, shall we say. And so the advice here would be to let go of that old self that no longer exists and embrace your newer self, the self that you are today. The real compassion, I think, for yourself involves letting go of the many stones that you've been carrying, and perhaps even the weight of the world, at least metaphorically, that you've been carrying on your shoulders as well. Indeed, you can then start to appreciate what you've learned from the past, from the mistakes, from the trials and tribulations. And this is certainly the message in my song, The Heart's Symphony, which I'll include a link to below as well. The younger self in that song is racked with self-doubt, wonders about one's place in the world and contributions and so forth, before finally reasoning that one has to try, and one has to be willing to have the courage to fail, as it were, and then move forward in the face of life's mysteries and uncertainties. Otherwise, again, we end up being trapped in the past and unable, paralyzed, perhaps, or worse. And even if we choose poorly, we have to appreciate that, look, at that moment, we were operating under a certain set of assumptions with less than perfect information, and just like everyone else. And we're all shaped by our past and the conditions that we found ourselves in at that moment. I think the tragedy, rather, is that in most cases, isn't that we made a mistake or that we've done something stupid, but rather if we choose not to learn from what we've done, right? And often, not always, there's certainly a chance that we can correct or make atone for the mistakes that we've made, or learn and do better the next time. And so I think that's the key to progress in terms of our own development and so on. The tragedy is that in most cases, we've chosen not to learn. We've forgotten, or we haven't been willing to invest the time and energy necessary to learn from that mistake and to change moving forward. And of course, then there's all the people from our past as well, who might be quite able and willing to remind us of our past selves and our shortcomings and our failures. There are people, for example, that I would have known, and in your lives that you would have known, who could quite readily, or who knew you decades ago, and who might say, well, that's not the guy I remember. and they could tell you a story of something foolish or perhaps even hurtful that I might have done, and they'd be right, except that that was a different person who no longer exists. But even then, if we look back on our lives, you can see that the person who was lashing out or behaving foolishly or unpredictably or what have you was probably a hurt animal themselves of some kind or another, right? Struggling with who knows what pain or trauma in their own lives. And again, that's not to say that people shouldn't be held accountable for their actions. We all have to be held accountable, taking into account, by the way, our age and our circumstances. And if we are threatening to others or even to ourselves, there should be appropriate interventions. So I'm not questioning any of that. The issue, rather, is that our capacity for understanding and compassion. If you have a neurological condition or a brain function or malfunction, I should say, and you end up being a serial killer, then there are two key issues involved, right? First and foremost, to get you off the streets, right? To protect the rest of society. But the other issue is to understand the why question. So let's say that in the case of the serial killer in question, their anterior insular cortex has been severely damaged, and they simply cannot feel empathy for others or understand the impact of their horrible actions and their behavior, lethal behavior. And in that sense, I believe that we can all feel some compassion, at least in the sense of realizing that there are forces at play that don't allow that person in question to behave in a socially acceptable way. Again, it doesn't mean we have to let them go. No, we have to protect ourselves in society. right? But the point is rather that there's a certain degree of compassion and empathy and understanding that we can have even for that person. And that's kind of how I approach my university students, none of whom, to my best of my knowledge, would be killers or serial killers. But I do know that there are forces at play that affect their attendance, that affect their motivation, their learning, their intellectual development, and their test performances or their performances in the papers that they write and so on. And so I'm not upset if they miss classes or don't turn in assignments on time, for example, or that they don't do great on their paper or their test, because I know there have to be reasons for their behavior. And I suppose you could say that there are some reasons that are better or more socially acceptable than others. And sometimes university students, just like all of us, just behave irresponsibly. But that's okay. It's a matter of perspective and context. So they're not hurting anyone, certainly by not getting their work done on time. And so we don't have to, put them in jail. They're mainly only hurting themselves. And the chances are that they're probably already struggling with their own life challenges or mental health or personality issues and so on. So whatever the sources of their own pain or fear or anxiety or stress or what have you, they don't need me to add more weight to their life struggle by judging them harshly or scolding them or refusing to accept their late work. I just be adding weight to what might be for them is already an unbearable burden. Again, this is not the same thing as judging or not judging people because of their missteps and holding them accountable. Of course, we have to hold people accountable. If you miss the exam and there's no accommodations made or there's no excuse, I have no choice but to give you a 0 on that exam. So there's a harsh enough consequence. You'll probably fail the course as a result. But rather, it just means that what we're doing here is understanding that there's still a real, living, breathing, struggling person with whom we might be engaged in a particular relationship or context. And you can much more readily forgive them once you understand their struggles. That, of course, is why we much more readily tend to forgive our people, members of our own family, for example, the people that we know best, because we know what they're going through. Again, not always, but I'm just saying as a general principle. Whereas the stranger or the person that we meet on the street or even the work colleague, somebody's a little bit more distant from us, not as central to our lives, we have a harder time and we don't invest as much time and energy in trying to understand their struggles. Okay? So again, let me be clear here. It's not that you have to maintain a relationship with every damaged individual or suffering person that you meet along the way, including even within your own family. Sometimes it's better just to let go. There are times when you have to walk away, including perhaps within your own family, maybe for your own safety, for your own self-preservation, for your own well-being. Just as there are times where some people need to be locked up, if you will, for the safety of the community. But here's the difference. It's the ability to walk away without hatred in one's heart. And that's how we translate compassion into forgiveness. Indeed, that's how we can start to forgive the world too, not just ourselves. And it's funny, as I typed this into my computer, this thought, I'm not kidding, no cap, the sun burst through the clouds at this very moment on Christmas Day. Literally the brightest moment of the morning. A coincidence? I'm sure. But let's appreciate the symbolism here too. So yes, we're all capable then of rendering judgments which flow from our thoughts and our mouths so effortlessly. It costs us nothing to judge ourselves or to judge others harshly. If we direct the harsh judgments against ourselves, though, I would caution that we might be giving in to a certain kind of nihilism that denies our own self-worth and purpose for being here. And in fact, we might even, in the worst case, somehow conclude that we're not worthy of being here. And that's the worst possible conclusion. And I've known people, had friends and colleagues who have killed themselves. So, and then if we direct our harshest judgments against others, well, we might be afforded a few moments of comfort or that sense of superiority. But worst of all, we might start to conclude that they're not worthy of being, respected, having dignity, of being alive. And again, we know what happens when people don't think of other human beings as worthy, or as even as humans, or of being worthy of being alive. So perhaps ironically then, I even feel compassion for those with whom I most strongly disagree, or who are in positions of power and influence and who are hurting others, arguably, measurably by particular standards. And it would be hard, but I'd still be able to hug that person beneath the public persona and beyond their cruelty, shall we say. And just like the serial killer who cannot control himself, I'd want the person rendered neutral. I'd want them removed from power, perhaps even jailed, depending on how much of a threat that they posed. But again, that's different, right, than wanting that out of anger or hatred or retribution even. The difference is that you need to develop, I think, your capacity then for empathy and humanizing even the worst of the characters that we observe around us. And if you can do that, then you're reaching upward for a different kind of ability, a different kind of intelligence, not the kind that allows you to solve complex differential equations, but rather the kind that allows you to understand the interconnectedness of human beings everywhere, and quite frankly, of the universe writ large. There but for the grace of God go I, that concept. Others express anger or confusion or doubt or anxiety or blindness, just as you and I at times have expressed anger, confusion, doubt, anxiety, blindness. And what do we seek from others when we're in our most troubled states? Compassion and empathy, and perhaps ultimately forgiveness. Again, that doesn't mean that they or we don't have to be held accountable. Of course we do. Rather, I'm only talking then about the ability to simultaneously, hold ourselves and hold others accountable, and yet let go of the anger and the philosophical judgment that renders others as unworthy of love and compassion, including ourselves. And so on Christmas Day, obviously I could be wrong, but I think that was the purpose of Christ's existence, or the message that he hoped to convey. Yes, there's the whole aspect of God and eternity and life everlasting. But if I understand these issues correctly, then this is that's what compassion and forgiveness ultimately lead to in terms of God or the Creator or connectedness with the universe. So we're here for a few years, perhaps even 10 decades on this planet in this form, like the recent centenarian, Dick Van Dyke, who I loved watching growing up. And then we move on in form and experience to a place that we cannot truly know until we get there. But while we are here in this form, the best that we can do with all of our flaws is to love, to forgive, and to shine our lights as brightly as we're capable of. And once again, as I wrote these words, the sun burst through the clouds. And so maybe that's the point then. Just as the sun sneaks behind the clouds occasionally, it's a challenge then to shine our lights continually and at every moment. But just don't give in to the darkness, and always strive to poke your head out from behind the clouds to shine your light on this world as long as you possibly can. And until next time, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs and compassion and forgiveness in abundance. Merry Christmas.